There is the Pharaoh's focus. We saw Chris Pharaoh chatting on, I think it was a porch swing with my guest today in Tom Cavanaugh, VP production at Tupelo Raycom. Love Chris. Really look forward to this conversation with Tom. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into the life of Tom Cavanaugh in this conversation, and certainly don't want to get involved in any contractor copyright dispute with Pharaoh Focus and the name that he has branded and has become synonymous with sports media. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio and also broadcaster and live events. This is the On to Something podcast, where we're not just going to go chronological into Tom's life and career. We're going to learn about him from all angles and really get to know who he is on a deep level. And we might have a visitor in Yates, a dog in the background. I have a dog right below me here. So everybody is welcome in this fun forum to really deep dive into those in sports media and their psyche. So with that said, first of all, Tom, I really appreciate you making the time and looking forward to having you on and doing this.
Absolutely. I've watched a couple, and it's always fun to, as I said, watch people enjoy what they do. And it seems like you kind of enjoy this too.
And I got a feeling that you really enjoy what you're doing right now. How do you use mindfulness and put it into work during a live broadcast in the way in which you go about sort of operating in that space?
It's everything. I always have a rule that I always tell people it's 80-20. 80% of what we do is, and I think I even used this on the porch with but it always hits me because we think of, I'm working at ESPN, I'm working at Fox, and it's always network. How do I reach a level so that the network is pleased with my work? But the most important thing in the mindfulness is to make sure you're aware of the people around you rather than what we're doing for a nameless, faceless network. So the mindfulness to me has always been just natural because it's about the people. How do we support and help the people around us? It's if you think about, people always talk about follow your passion or how did you know what you wanted to do? I always just started simply and said I wanted to be happy, and then let's work backwards from there. How are you happy? Well, if you're fulfilled, well, how did I get to fulfilled? Well, I was curious, and then it was always just keep working backwards from that to say what's the greatest fulfillment you can have is when I noticed for me, helping others. Maybe it was because I have a bunch of, there are a lot of educators in our family. Two of my sisters were educators in Montessori. My dad did that as well. And I just saw them helping, if it's little kids, if it's whatever, junior high. And I thought that's a great feeling to be able to pass that down. So mindfulness to me in a live sports production, it stands out. That's the other thing. It stands out compared to, yes, you want to be a good producer or director, you want to beat on your craft. But if you can focus on what are the soft skills, which I think are the most important skills, they call them, you're always going to be ahead of the game because you're in control of it, because you can work on how you interact with people and the impact you have on them. So it's kind of rare in a truck. A lot of times you can get a little intense, but you bring that energy and all of a sudden people are like, I think I want to be around more of that. So it's just it's kind of natural, I think, for me, because I was around that a lot.
How young were you, Tom, when you came to that realization that it was so much more than you, but the people around you?
In a weird way, I'll say very young, because I wouldn't say knowing live sports production and how I am, but as an adult, but our family, my mom and dad, we would talk about things so much. And so I have so many stories of my dad saying, this is what happened in a Board of Education meeting, or something went down this way. And we could just ask a lot of questions. It didn't matter if I was 10 years old, whatever, we always had a voice. So to figure this stuff out, I would sit there and say, I think I've had experiences with this at a really young age. And so by the time I got older, I remember thinking, haven't we already reviewed this? Don't we already know this kind of? And I thought, well, no, I still need to know more and can know more, but I don't really have early on in my career, I can tell you stories of being at ESPN and thought, nah, I don't want to do this management stuff, because back in the 90s, it was still, boy, if you yell, if you get after somebody, you're a good leader. And I was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And so I kind of took that as the Bible. But then I realized quickly, now I can make this my own. I want to make it what I want it to be rather than follow in those footsteps, because we need to break that tradition. And I think it's happening, but still a long way to go, I would say too.
I think you're absolutely right. There is this kind of transformation happening in production trucks where, and you've been a trendsetter and others who I've spoken with, there's a level of compassion that
Yeah.
comes into the truck now. It's not just about do this or else, like the world is going to end. Understandably, things are going to happen. You're going to want to be a perfectionist, but there's a human error that is involved. How do you find that you're able to get to the level of being most compassionate with yourself? I know you do that so well with other people, but how do you get to that own mindset internally for you?
I think I was allowed to do that from a very young age. I think the way my mom and dad are and were, we were allowed to explore who we are, who we want to be. And again, because we had a voice, most, if you think of most child's experience, it's a lot of do this. You're just told what to do, how to be compliant. Education's that way. Show up at 8:30, do spelling, do math, follow the rules, rather than can I question them? Because if you question them, you're being disrespectful. And that was never a tone in our family. It was you had an opinion and you mattered. And it didn't matter if it was kind of an immature or not well thought out opinion. That's okay. That's part of your process of figuring out who you are. So if you know who you are, you have to be able to be comfortable with your emotions and your up and down. And am I, what do I need in life? And you don't know that until you're given that compassion yourself to allow that growth. Because you think about it, most parenting styles are the kid's emotional and I want a cookie, I want to do something. And it's like, nope, if you're going to act kind of disobedient or have a lot of aggression or a lot of emotion, you're supposed to go to your room. When in fact, that child needs that attachment to figure out who am I? What is this energy I'm experiencing right now? And instead we disconnect them. We throw them away and go, nope, go to your room. This is discipline. I'm going to teach you a lesson, when in fact they need just the opposite. So I was always allowed, in my mind, I was always allowed to explore that and say, what is this? What am I experiencing? What am I going through?
If more people had that setup at the house, what do you think our community would look like? Because it sounds to me like such a thriving, healthy way to grow up in the exchange of ideas. And if we were to get more people to sort of think and act that way, and that what you did in no way is it an anomaly, but maybe if we had more of that around us, what power could that bring?
The power is you're connected to yourself. That's the greatest gift. When I tell folks, if it's through whatever conversations, therapy, whatever you're doing to figure out who you are, if you can get connected to yourself, each of us has that amazing, potential. What I don't think we realize is we get disconnected from very early ages of trying to cope. So in that situation where I'm a kid and I get disciplined, how do they cope? And a lot of times the coping mechanism, more often than not, disconnects you. So what that would feel like, would be incredible, because what people are, when they get that sense of like teamwork and camaraderie, and it's like, my God, this is a great feeling, that can be constant. If anything, that's what's bizarre for people. I think when I tell folks the number one goal is to create a safe, collaborative environment. Well, there's a lot of work that goes on to get there. That's a great, cool, easy thing to say, and everyone's wanting to do that. And boy, isn't this, looking, and what we're doing is we're trying to sound like we know what we're doing, when how do we know what steps we need to do to get there? So you have to be a part of that with the people. And so I think it makes a difference.
What is the greatest, Tom, and Tom Cavanaugh is with me, VP production, Tupelo Raycom and great at TV. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. What is the greatest pep talk you've ever given yourself through the steps you've taken in the business?
I would probably say it was probably when I was at Speed Channel, because it was the most challenging to be able to have to come into a network and say, you've got to improve a lot of things. And it was simple. It was, part of the process was maybe to get people to, I don't want to say believe in something, because they were all talented, but they had been told a lot of negative things. So it was, be confident in knowing that you know what you're doing, because the goal is not to say, look what I did at Speed Channel. The goal was to say, you all, let's do this with the skills and the talent level that you have. So as long as I was true to that for myself, I would keep going down that path. And then it was noticed, and LA said, hey, you guys are improving. I see things. But it was these folks that are doing it. They were allowed, we created a features unit, and they did amazing stuff. And so when people were, it wasn't even a matter of being recognized. It was just allowing them to do what they can do and what they want to do. So the pep talk to me was, keep going, even though there's a lot of slings and arrows coming at you, but know why you're doing it. Am I doing it for the recognition? I would have gotten out of it. I did it to say, I want to validate this idea of, mindfulness, safe, collaborative environment. Is there something there? Can that really make a difference now that it's put to test at a higher level, or just more people involved? Because smaller production companies, it's always worked. But then it was at a network. Can you really influence and I don't want to say change people, but make people aware of kind of what they can be and how they can, again, connect with themselves.
You empower others, and obviously in listening to you talk about the way in which you overcame something and having that positive self-talk, how do you feel others have responded to not just what is one of your best traits, which is empowering, but the other skills that you bring? Beyond that, what are they from a grassroots perspective, beyond you being such a great people person, showing compassion and creating, like you used the word, a collaborative, organic environment to really see and maximize the potential of those around you? But where else do your skills lie in this industry beyond that? Because that's big, but there's much more to the Tom Cavanaugh story than that.
Curiosity. Just the fact, I always kind of called it being greedy, because when I was in high school, I think I always knew I wanted to do this. I literally I'd take our home film camera, an old film camera, shoot This Week in Baseball on the TV, and it was on WGN and NBC. So I would record both of like the bloopers or the classy plays. So I always knew I wanted to do it. And then I would take a jam box and put, do real film up. And so knowing that, I think the curiosity was, okay, I want to do this. Well, I go to Michigan State. 1 in 15 of you will get into sports production. And I was like, I could be that one. I've just kept being curious. I didn't care that my first job in Savannah wasn't making any money. I enjoyed it. And so I was curious, and I kept going. And then I remember leading to realizing, wow, I'm kind of good at graphics design. I'm not the artist. I would take magazine articles and take out the paper. This is way back in the 80s, 90s. And then I would maybe have a VHS of something and go to our graphics folks and say, I want it to be a combination of these things. Not knowing that was, oh, you're a good graphics producer, but I was curious. I was like, how would I communicate that to a graphics person? Because I'm not an artist. I could maybe do a stick figure, but I'm not that sketch artist. But I have that creativity in mind because I was curious about it. So I just did it how I would want to see it. And I think that curiosity just I would keep pursuing things. Like, I don't care if it's 1 in 15 and I'm making no money. I still want to keep going, and I want to try this. So the curiosity led to the passion. Everyone always talks about the passion. You got to be curious first and just say, what would it be like if we did this? What would happen if we did these things? And so to me, curiosity is a superpower of a lot of things we do.
You tapping into curiosity in the industry and that enabling things to really start to prosper in your favor. But where do you find yourself, completely unrelated to sports media, the most curious?
Probably education. I've for like 6-7 years, although it's funny, it kind of takes me back to, I'm taking the production world and wanting to create the Montessori network for their professional development. And that's, again, talking to my sisters. This was 5-6 years ago. And I'm fascinated by OTTs and technology and how can we help? Because right now, education it's hurting. nobody wants to teach, everyone's kind of ripping them. And so I was like, God, but there's so many things we can do using technology. And I am following some of that. So my curiosity is, how are we taking technology and making education transformed into what it needs to be? Because there was a great thing, Google education seminar, I forget his, Jamie Ketchup, I think is his name. He said, forever we've been demonizing education. Education did what it was designed to do, get us into the industrial, all that stuff. It did what it was supposed to do. Never thought they could do it. That transformation just needs to happen again. So we need to quit poo-pooing education and say, oh, it did it exactly as it was designed, but now we're ready for the next wave. So that's fascinating to me, because I think it's one of the most powerful things we can do is now reach everybody with, information's out there. Anyone can have access to that. It's how do we formulate it so that it can help them then create the intelligence.
If I was sitting at a desk next to you in third grade, what am I going to learn about the young version of Tom Cavanaugh?
We, in third grade specifically, I was part of third and fourth grade, we had creative learning classes. So it was it's funny because that's not, we weren't in Montessori, because that's a Montessori trait, but we had multi-age, and it was, you were kind of allowed to do what you wanted to do. It's funny. I think I'm having a theme here. I think I have a lot of freedom. So to me, it was gather your groups together. And what do we like to do at recess? We're going to play kickball. We're going to do so-and-so. So for me, it was, how do we get a group of us together in the classroom, outside, and have the best time? And how do you, it's funny, I still like to do that. how do you get people together? It's a theme. So what you learned about me was love sports, all Michigan stuff. So it's all Detroit Tigers, Detroit Lions, all that stuff, the Red Wings. I was a huge sports fan growing up. And it's funny how it's kind of evolved into, yeah, I follow it, but there's nothing like when you were a kid, and every batting average of every Detroit Tiger baseball player and that kind of thing. So yeah, big into sports.
To see, even at that young age, when you were in grade school, to see sort of the wheel starting to turn in your brain as to there being some clear signs of foreshadowing that what you were doing at that age would ultimately be what you're doing now. And in that in-between time and the lead up to where you are today, how does that sit with you to know that at such a young age, such that tender, innocent age, that you were able to take you who you were and continue to just be yourself through this process and carry that through the different stages of your life?
First thing I want to do is I want other people to have that. It's going back to the home environment. I want others to be able to have a nugget of that, to allow them to figure out who they are, follow their passions, follow their creativity. Everyone's an artist, everyone's creative. And I've had many conversations with folks. Not everyone's creative. And I don't mean everyone's an artist creative. You can be an engineer and be creative. Everyone has that. So I want it for everyone else, because I wouldn't say I knew as a third grader I'm going to be doing X, but I knew I was emboldened to be curious, and I could allow myself to be curious, to the point where I just had this conversation with my mom up in Sheboygan, Michigan, where we love to go up in the, every summer. And I was telling them, I said, what Mom and Dad did for me. So I go to Michigan State, graduate, telecommunications degree, first job, maybe I'm making 15 grand back in the late 80s. That's the equivalent of me saying, I want to go, be a musician and go travel around. And you just graduated college. Why are you're not going to make any money. What are you going to make, 10 or 15 grand? They never said that to me. My dad said, consider it grad school. Just consider it that you're going to learn what you want to learn. And meanwhile, both family backgrounds there was a lot of success, if success is money, which I disagree with that, but there was a lot of, this is what you need to do to, work hard. That concept was never introduced to me, that if you're not making enough money, you're not successful. It was go, you're going to enjoy this because this is what you love.
There's such a power to that because it's a nurturing environment. You probably didn't feel pressure, because some might say to their son or daughter, well, you have this X amount of time to go down that path of chasing your dream. But to know that you had that stability and that support through it all, how do you quantify that to this day? Just to know, like, how much of an impact those words back then had on everything that would then later come for you.
I think feeling that support is the drive to make sure others feel it. Certainly our kids, Taylor, our son, he's a freshman just right now up in Wilmington, Keegan, our daughter, it's the same thing. It's an empowerment and knowing that, but it's different for them just because there's no set way of doing it. You're going to empower somebody and use their own amazing individual skills and what they love to do. I remember having conversations with my dad, like when I first got to state, about political science stuff and Warren Cohen and Noam Chomsky and so. And he was like, good Lord, you're making me think so differently than, and now our kids are doing the same thing. Just the way they look at the world and the way they're taking it in, I'm like, holy cow, that's amazing. Their empowerment, or that ability to be who they are, allows them to look at things differently, I think. And it's given back to me in, tenfold. And it's amazing to be a part of, to say, this is what I was able to receive and then, I guess, thrive in, and they're doing the same. And so you see that. It's so much more powerful when you see it in somebody else than yourself, I think, sometimes too. And it's like, wow, that's very cool. So a lot of times I'll give it a thanks, Mom. Just and yes, thanks, Dad, wherever he may be. He passed away in like 2004, but I always tell people there's so many key times where a nurtured heart approach was something my sister sent me. I'm like, oh my God, that's totally Dad. I can hear him. And yes, occasionally people tell me when I get on a roll, Dad had a certain way of talking and his fingers did a certain thing. And they're like, you sound just like your dad. And I'm like, yeah, he could have a big influence on me, I'm sure.
What do you think your dad would say to you now, just given the joy, given the success, given the compassion you have for others, and just the pride that he would feel in seeing the man you've become?
Amazing. He was very good at saying, I love the process. I love what you're doing. And I see it in your eyes that you're making a difference, and that's what you wanted to do. And there's nothing more fulfilling than that. And so it was he was definitely a trailblazer in swimming upstream against a lot of things, like Board of Education meetings in the 70s where they were going to bring back corporal punishment. And he was like, hell no. The 7-1 vote is no. That's him saying, you're not doing it. It's a criminal act if you do it. Like this is in the 70s where hell, I think even half the people now still may think corporal punishment's a good thing, but he was like, no, it's a definite no. And here's why. So him going against the grain kind of reminds me of a little bit of the leadership stuff, like what I was doing when ESPN was, you're supposed to yell at people. And I was like, no, that doesn't feel right. So to me, I'm definitely following in those footsteps, because it's admirable to see somebody say, I'm going to stand up for something I believe in. And so, yeah, I can definitely feel that presence of there's pride, and then I see it in Taylor and see it in Keegan and say, oh, I can absolutely see and feel that pride,
That pride, I feel like, rubs off not just on the family, but in those who you work with when you're working on productions. And I like to think of it as, for you, it's like you've developed this coaching tree, in the sense of, like, we know when we see a big college football coach or an NFL coach, and 1 year on staff, they've got all of these future head coaches that would go on to do big things. But I think for you, Tom, you have your own coaching tree, and in a way in sports media, and that there are so many people who you have positively impacted, and you go, well, and do much more than perhaps others would in helping bolster that person and build that person up. That was what I wanted to get across in this conversation, is that just the way in which you have a transformative effect on so many people. And I just feel, as we sort of wrap up this conversation, Tom, that essence came out, and just the ability for you to be open and to share those stories and kind of step outside just the industry talk, I think for me is very meaningful. And I know for others will be very meaningful as well. Tom Cavanaugh, VP Production, Tupelo Raycom, Great Television. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. Thanks so much for taking us on this journey and giving us some really keen insights into what you have done, who you are, and how you think.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for your time too. I enjoyed it.